one thing that I found interesting this past week, just in the past literally 7 days, twice on Bill Simmons' podcast, there have been some interesting conversations about Jokic, and I've been seeing more and more this narrative kind of felt to me like media putting out the feelers like, hey, Jokic is kind of playing incredible. The Nuggets are kind of in first place. Do you guys think it might be okay if I vote for him for the three-peat and the MVP now? I know we don't usually do that, but we're going to float this narrative a little bit and let's see how people react to it. To give you guys context, the Nuggets are first in the West. Jokic's numbers aren't as impressive as last year. If you look just across the board reading the stats, he had quite a few more rebounds last year, but he also had quite a few more teammates injured last year. He's averaging 25 points per game, 10.8 rebounds a game, and 9.7 assists per game. So if you were one of those people, I'm not saying you, Justin, but if you, the listener, were one of those people adamant about Russell Westbrook winning because of the triple-double thing, then come on, you got to jump on the bandwagon for the Jokic three-peat. So I think it's interesting. He's got great shooting numbers as well, almost 82%. Free throws, 37.5% for three-point percentage. Not bad, especially for a center. His true shooting percentage, 64.6%. If you're above 60% on that, that's typically a really good place to be. Just to give you guys an idea, let me pull up my other tabs here. I just wanted to give you quick, for your reference, Justin, before I throw it to you, stats of the other players that we've talked about. So here's Jason Tatum, Celtics at the top of the East, 30.8 points per game, 8.1 rebounds per game, 4.2 assists per game. Shooting numbers not quite as impressive, although that free throw percentage is nice at 86%. But this is the go-to guy of the Celtics, of course, best team in a very loaded Eastern Conference. Luka, Justin, your MVP pick at the start of the year, having a video game like season, it continues for him. He's got, I believe it was like 37% usage rate. So we're approaching like Harden Houston levels with that. 34.2 points per game, 8.9 rebounds, 8.7 assists, just filling up that stat sheet. Percentage numbers not as impressive as what tends to happen with high usage. So 35.4% from downtown, 74.3% from the free throw stripe. Giannis and I don't know, kind of feels like they're struggling, even though they're third in the East. The Bucks, they've been a little underwhelming for me. Their offense hasn't been that great, but they are third in a deep East. And Giannis has 31.7 points per game, 11.8 rebounds, and then 5.2 assists, also filling up that stat sheet. 3-point percentage, way down, not taking a ton of those. Free throw percentage way down, 65.7%, still hasn't really added that element to his game, but we know the Greek Freak is insane. Side note, there's all kinds of crazy nicknames that you've never heard about on Basketball Reference. It always entertains me to look at, like, for example, Luka. There are several nicknames in here I'll show you that I didn't even know that he had. The Matador, Cool Hand Luke, I totally get,
Yeah,
but I
I've
haven't
heard
heard
that
it.
one, I think.
The Dawn, Wonder Boy, El Nino Maravilla, Swaggy L.
That's lame.
Uh,
That's a
I
stupid
would
nickname.
be calling Basketball Reference trying to get that off of
Right.
there. Luca Legend, definitely heard that one.
Yeah.
Too Easy makes sense, but I haven't heard that one. And
Is
then
that a
Luca
nickname?
Magic,
Like Luca Too Easy Doncic? Like,
I guess. I don't
what?
know. I don't want that one either. So I don't know. It's interesting just seeing those Basketball Reference. Anyway,
Interesting.
I digress. Back to the crux of the matter. Justin, your thoughts on Jokic and just kind of the MVP race in general as it stands right now?
Yeah, it's tough because I think with with this rankings and basically players going back to back winning it, I think the media looks for excuses not to give it to somebody.
Sure.
And I think with the Joker, what you said earlier is correct, with a lot of the Nuggets having their starters in the lineup for the majority of the season. I think it's going to be seen like he's having an easier season compared to last season. So I think they're going to hold that against him unless they win like 70 games or something. So I think that's going to be a strike against him. I think what's very profound on here, take a look at the Eastern Conference and the Cleveland Cavaliers. You take a look at the Bucks and you take a look at the Cavs, and you mentioned that Giannis, the Bucks have been having an underwhelming season. Donovan Mitchell, I think, is a serious dark horse to win MVP. I still would put Luka ahead of him. I think Luka's just, I think, the better player. That's just weird because I saw Donovan Mitchell destroy the Bulls for 71 points, even though 2 of those baskets should not have counted. But I digress. When they played, nevertheless, that was a sensational performance. But I will say, I mean, if the Cavaliers get that 3rd seed, I would say he's more of an MVP candidate over Giannis. I mean,
Wow.
I think you have to really measure expectations. I mean, Donovan Mitchell has had an incredible season, taking a franchise with low expectations. If they get the 3rd seed, I mean, right below, Brooklyn and right below Boston. And by the way, I mean, it's not like those 2 teams have like a runaway lead in the East. I mean, it is extremely tight. I mean, a lot of people would disagree with this, but I wouldn't say it's insane to say the Cavaliers, I mean, it's possible if things break their way to be the number 1 seed in the East. I mean, I don't think that is.
Yeah, they got a puncher's chance.
I wouldn't pick them to be the number 1 seed, but certainly would I say it's impossible? No. And I think if Donovan Mitchell leads them to a top 3 seed, I think he is highly advisable as a top candidate. And looking at this NBA official MVP list, it's called the Kia MVP ladder. I mean, the disrespect for Donovan is real. I mean, he's tied for 7th with John Morant.
Wow.
So, and Zion's 10th. So that tells you how much respect Zion has. But just the rankings here, it goes Giannis 5, Luka 4, Kevin Durant 3, Jason Tatum 2, and then the Joker 1. So,
wow.
And I think, to me, I know we've done a lot of Nets bashing on this podcast. It's been a rocky season for them, but you got to give it up for Kevin Durant. This is a team going through a lot of turmoil. The interview came out on Bleacher Report about him saying that he wasn't really thinking low expectations of his teammates, but yet they are at the top of the East and the number 2 seed. I mean, that is pretty incredible as well. Through all the turmoil with Kyrie Irving, I think that's a take into a strong consideration when we're measuring the MVP race. And so when I'm looking at guys with equal to comparable numbers as the Joker, and yet I see, Donovan Mitchell, with lower expectations, or Kevin Durant dealing with all the BS, maybe self-inflicted, but nevertheless, really, pushing the Nets to the top of the East. I think that might give him the edge over the Joker, but we'll see. I mean, extremely close. I mean, you can't really go wrong. I don't like really this whole thing about, oh, this guy got robbed, or this is a disgrace to the NBA if, the Joker wins it, 3 times in a row. I think he'd be well deserving, but I think it's really close, and I think there are a lot of guys that are going to be top competition.
Yeah, couple thoughts. I do wonder how the next month of KD being out will affect that.
That's true.
I would expect, especially if the Nets can hold like top 4 seed, it seems like that hurts his case, which is unfortunate because that's due to injury, not due to KD.
Yeah.
I mean, as much drama as there's been, as much criticism as we've given for things off the court, we've always been big KD fans when he's on the court.
Agreed. We have.
No doubt. So I like your take about Donovan Mitchell, and I do think it's an interesting spin because that's a team that has not been in the narrative as a top puncher until this season, until he comes over to that team in the offseason. So it's easy to make a narrative around that. I think the other narratives are a tad bit more difficult. I mean, for Luka, the Mavericks being 4th place in the West at the recording of this podcast is not super impressive, but the numbers are super impressive. So I still think if the Mavs go on a run at any point, like a 7+ game win streak in the second half of the season to raise their seed, I think that's your ticket for Luka. I think for the Bucks, it almost feels like it's out of reach for Giannis unless that team turns around and wins the East. Even then, they are perceived as a very deep team, and he's won MVP before. So I think that pulls against him quite a bit. I think the Celtics are perceived as like super deep. So it's going to be tough for Tatum to win, but his advantage is he hasn't won it before.
That's true. Yeah.
And he is putting up impressive numbers, more than 30 points a game at this point. And that's a number that for us 90s kids, brings a lot of significance. It just kind of draws your eye to it because you think of Michael Jordan when you see someone averaging, 30 plus points per game.
That's true.
Whether that's unfair or not, that I'm just saying there's a threshold that when you get to that number of points per game. So I think you're right. If the Cavaliers got like a top 3 seed, like you said, that's, I think, the easiest narrative. And then we just have to see where his numbers are and if they're impressive enough to scale the other players. There's no argument that I think Luka's numbers are most impressive, like jumping out on paper. But when you look at the efficiency and the percentages, I think Jokic's numbers are even a little bit more impressive, even though he's scoring less. So just in terms of like the efficiency that he's playing out. I mean, the other night he took 5 shots, made all 5 of them, and had like 16 rebounds and 11 assists or something like that. Or maybe I have those backwards. Maybe it was 11 rebounds and 16 assists. He was just like passing the ball around, made every shot. Kind of reminded me of, the LeBron efficiency Miami Heat years. Remember that season where he was trying to shoot 60% or better for almost the entire season. He almost did it. So I love that there are so many narratives that work here for MVP. That's a good thing to keep this conversation going. I know some folks don't like the MVP conversation, but I think it's also a good way to talk about the league as a whole. Any other thoughts on the MVP race, Justin?
No, you pretty much covered it. It's exciting. I mean, it's good for the league when it's that competitive. So.
Yeah.
Pat, you're talking about the trade deadline. There's been some light trade rumors regarding Trae Young, but from what I've read, if there's any move to be made, it's likely to be done after this season. In terms of how Trae Young is feeling about this whole situation, as best as you can gather, what's kind of his mentality among this team? And we've seen, many leaders of other teams become disgruntled, request trades after just lots of turmoil. Do you feel that he's starting to feel that way, or do you think he sees a viable future with the Atlanta Hawks despite all the turmoil going on?
Yeah, so Atlanta would never trade Trae Young, and then Trae Young would never give up on Atlanta. So they're going to be forced to make it work because, he's the golden child of the city. Everybody loves him. And currently, I don't know if there's a more popular athlete in the city of Atlanta, which really says something because the Hawks come in a distant 3rd place behind the Braves and the Falcons. So, and then I could never, or at least not anytime soon, imagine Trae forcing his way out. I feel like that article that came out a week or 2 ago, I felt like that was a little overblown. So really, I wouldn't expect that anytime soon.
So, if in fact Nate McMillan leaves and there's a coaching vacancy, whether he just decides to throw up his hands and just quits, or at the end of the season they decide to make a change, besides Trae Young, what is going to bring a prospective coach into this franchise? I mean, where exactly do they go? There's just so much turmoil, but yet, this team has been very relevant in terms of the Eastern Conference. And right now, despite, there's perennial powers like Boston and Milwaukee and even, Philadelphia to some extent. However, I just think the whole league seems wide open. I don't think we're in the days of just having a couple of power teams just, dominate and just win titles. I feel like there's a lot of optimism depending on which moves teams make. So I think with the Hawks, they've had some success over the past few years. Kind of what is the steps you see in terms of this team kind of riding the ship despite filling those executive vacancies that they currently have?
Yeah, like you said, that those will have to wait. And I just couldn't imagine this team making a deep playoff push as currently constructed. If they go out and make some surprising moves, then yeah, absolutely. But right now, I would say they're a play-in team, 1st-round exit. That's their ceiling, which is really unfortunate. And then I think the next move would be getting a new coach. And I don't think they would have to look very far. A lot of Hawks fans are very keen on the idea of bringing back in somebody from the Mike Budenholzer era. And Kenny Atkinson, Quinn Snyder. And, he just has a legendary coaching tree. And I don't think you would have to go very far to go bring back somebody who has ties and, did those few winning years in Atlanta. And also who is relevant.
You mentioned the positive favor that Trae Young still carries and holds in that community, and being the star of the city, so to speak, as you said. You'd have to think it's unwise for any NBA coach to, and not intentional, of course, but it's difficult when they butt heads with their star player. What is kind of the perception on the other side of that with Coach McMillan? I mean, are fans, kind of throwing their hands up in the air? Coaches typically seem to be that scapegoat when things go, when teams aren't meeting their expectations. What's the sense of the fan base and the community around Coach McMillan after that sort of dust up in the media?
Yeah, so Trae didn't get out of it scot clean. He did get some blame, some criticism of how he handled the disagreement in practice and of his general leadership, but that is dwarfed by the amount of support for him. Not everybody, but the vast majority of everybody around that area, they sided with Trae over Nate McMillan, of course. And like you said, that's just going to be the case. They're always going to side with the player. And Nate McMillan has the reputation of being an old school coach, and that can be good and bad. And sometimes it just grinds gears for players when he'll have, some of these rules like no cell phones at this time and that sort of thing. That it just kind of speaks to just like his the time he came up, and for better or for worse.